Hi, for the podcast this time I have Martin Smith of CyberPrism joining as a guest, and today we're going to be covering data integrity as a key topic in business management and why we should be concerned, broadly about the topic of data integrity. Martin, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hello everyone, I'm Martin Smith. I am the Managing Director of CyberPrism. My background is really in the military, I suppose. I spent 33 years in the Royal Marines, ended up commanding that organisation. But that's where I sort of plug into data, I suppose, in that we realised, going back to 2003, that in the future many of our operations wars would be won and lost in what we now call cyberspace. We took steps within the military to address that. So leaving in 2018 and moving into cybersecurity was quite intuitive for me. I've been Managing Director of CyberPrism for over 5 years now.
Yeah, it's really interesting coming from that background into industrial data and business data. And how the learnings that you have from that background, in data integrity, and why the data integrity in itself is so important is, really what we're discussing today. From that context, how is data integrity viewed as a threat?
So it's interesting being in a company that calls itself a cybersecurity company, and indeed is, but actually we specialise in operational technology, and I think that'll come out during this conversation. I'll tend to talk from that sort of perspective. So in many ways we're actually an engineering company. The people we employ are engineers, and in another sense, just like you, we're a data analytics company, but we're analysing different data for different reasons. In cybersecurity we talk about CIA, so we talk about confidentiality, integrity and availability, and conventionally you'd think if you're into IT, so you're a bank for instance, then confidentiality would be everything. You don't want to lose your customers' details. If you're in operational technology, or you're running systems that have to run 24/7, some of them are indeed safety related, they're all production relevant. So availability is sort of everything really, and the bit that gets missed in the middle is integrity and whether the data you're seeing can actually be trusted.
Yeah, I think that the trust in the data is everything, and it's the lack of trust, in that data sometimes it accounts for a lack of precision in decision making and a huge amount of conservatism. That even before that you realise that the data is wrong, the doubt over that data starts to become a problem. But it's an interesting one, because I think the notion of data integrity isn't particularly well thought of. People are aware of the CIA triad. There's also often talked about 4 tenets of data quality being completeness, consistency, correctness, and timeliness. And data integrity, very much applies to these first 3. You can expand it beyond completeness, correctness, and consistency, but it's very much the same thing. But I wonder why it is that my own ideas as well, but it'd be good to know your thoughts on why data integrity is so often overlooked. That people will focus on confidentiality and accessibility, and when integrity seems so important, why it is that it seems to be the area that has the least focus often.
Yeah, I think it might be the most difficult of those 3 areas to grapple with, partly because if you look at the other 2, if something goes wrong, especially in a cybersecurity sense, there's a smoking gun. So you either know that you've lost a whole load of data to the dark web, or you know that your industrial process has been shut down, or something's obliged you to shut your industrial process down, like the sort of East Coast pipeline. The problem with the data integrity issue is that by its very nature, you don't know about it. And that may be because something in your system has corrupted the data, or it may be, and increasingly I think this is a credible threat, that people are messing with your data deliberately, but the whole idea is that you don't know about it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting position, because people, they don't know about it, but from my experience that they have a lack of faith in the data. So people tend to know that there is likely to be a problem, or they're unsure of the data set. So people are often, in my experience, are very aware of a lack of integrity in their data set. and they know that it's there and they work around it. So from my experience from an engineering perspective, when we're looking at gathering information on plant performance or inspection data, that doubt translates into conservatism, where we're saying, well, our trends show maybe a failure could happen in 5 years, but we're not really sure about the data that it's based on. So we're going to act as if it's going to fail in 2 years or 3 years. Or it could be, this can result in overspend, it can result in your conservative turnaround times, all sorts of things. So although we inherently know that there are problems with the integrity of data, I think there is often an unwillingness to act upon it, or maybe a feeling of powerlessness to act upon it. So it's really I suppose the first question is that something that the challenge with your experience, that people's kind of knowledge that there's something wrong, and a reluctance to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean it makes risk analysis very difficult, and as you say, it causes people to adopt a sort of hedging strategy against inaccurate data. But that hedging strategy makes it very difficult to fine-tune your industrial processes. So it results in inefficiency, lack of effectiveness, higher cost than you would normally be subject to, which tends to get passed on to the consumer. And so you end up with this sort of general inefficiency, which in an era where we're trying to drive towards net zero and do execute all sorts of huge change in industry, that lack of ability to grapple with the processes and really understand them, and that lack of ability to hone in and drive hyper efficient operations is going to prejudice our ability to do that.
Yeah, it definitely seems to result in a lack of precision in our decision making, which, as discussed, it results in higher costs. I think in the worst case scenario, though, actually it just results in failure. That you can actually see things going wrong. The hedging, as you put it, or that conservatism, it still just means that in reality what it is your best guess. So there is still the potential to get things wrong. Actually to make some really bad decisions, if you were trending failure patterns within equipment, for instance, you could still, if your data that you're basing that on is wrong and you haven't really investigated why that might be wrong and the impact of that, you've just erred on the side of caution. That can still sometimes be wrong. You're still basing it on imprecise information. You could still have missed something there that actually means it's going to fail much quicker than that. Or there's all sorts of reasons. You could be within your business decisions. Then you could be making your company less profitable because of your hedging. But even at that, it could still be you might not have hedged enough. To actually guard against the financial impacts as well. So there becomes a point where really about governing your assets in every aspect, is about, it becomes as much about the data governance, about the information that you base it on.
Yeah, and I think you can see that effect almost migrating upwards to government level. So, as a country, do we understand how our industry is performing? Do we understand accurate financials behind it? And then that's got almost a geopolitical element to it. So actually, if someone could mess with that, and we know that there are state actors in whose interest it would be to do that, then how inaccurate could they make our view of our own industry? I think is a key question.
Yeah, absolutely, and it brings in a really interesting aspect to it as well, because I think we've let ourselves off with our own inaccuracies for a long time. I think often because we just feel it's too difficult to deal with. That the integrity of our data can break down over time just simply because of data transformation, and that could be as simple as moving from very old paper-based records for old industries through to digitizing, through to migrating systems. That the information can break down that way. It could be from sensors and things. But then when you actually bring in the potential for malicious intent as well, and significant malicious intent, beyond a disgruntled employee, or as my dad used to call it when as a controls engineer, button diddlers who would just try different things when they're working with plant. They could introduce error, now that you've got the potential for significant resource being put into poisoning your data, becomes a much bigger threat.
Yeah, data poisoning is undoubtedly an increased threat. I think that if you look beyond sort of 2018, where you had some very high profile cybersecurity attacks across the world which affected infrastructure, like the Maersk attack, etc. And then it's gone slightly quieter, except for Ukraine. So the implication is that states concerned with this sort of thing have decided not to expose their latest weapons system around the world, but that the Ukraine has become a sort of free fire and test zone for all of this sort of thing. So what are they doing in other parts of the world? That it's not that they're not attacking our network, it's not that they're not seeding things into our network, but a lot of that might have more to do with data integrity than denial of service. That's sort of what makes sense. So that they can then sort of ratchet this up and down. They can almost dial in how accurate our view of our own data is. It also allows them to execute a service attack essentially without people knowing. And the best known example of that probably is the attack in 2016 on the Iranian nuclear centrifuge system, where they caused centrifuges to spin too fast and break, but the key thing was it took the operators ages to find out because they weren't getting the data that told them there was a problem in the first place. So this sort of masking of data inaccuracy is quite big when you're looking at state-on-state threat.
One of the things that's really interesting to me on that is when you're thinking about response to cybersecurity and how an active malicious force can poison your data. The way that you'd go about protecting the data from that, and the means that you would go about spotting compromises in your data, are actually very similar to the way that you would just look after the integrity of your data generally. Actually, if you're looking for inaccuracies in your data, something that looks suspicious, if you're protecting the interaction with your data, if you're managing your systems, generally to improve overall health and the quality of your data, it chimes so completely with cybersecurity measures. Feels very much the same actions that you would take, or at least some strong similarities.
When you consider that across a lot of industry, operational technology networks, industrial control system networks aren't actually monitored effectively. There's been a lot of monitoring put into IT. OT is more difficult. It's an engineering problem rather than an IT problem. We know that active measures in OT networks can be dangerous. So all sorts of reasons, actually, we're not monitoring OT networks, and in many cases we're not exactly sure what's in that network. It's been built over the last 30 years, connected in ways that perhaps weren't envisaged when the original purchase was made. So our basic knowledge of what's happening inside our operational technology is by no means complete.
Which is, I suppose, from people who are working with industry, we probably find that really quite alarming. That actually, when we look, that we've got an incomplete knowledge of the systems which run our heavy industrial plant or our businesses, but you can really see why this can happen over time. That actually, in the same way that knowledge is lost, when a person leaves a company and moves on, and tacit knowledge hasn't been made explicit, in the way that can be, you can think of that in terms of processes and business processes. You can see that actually that the physical processes, the IT processes, and the data management processes, that knowledge can be lost as well. And I think anybody who's opened up, who has owned a PC or any kind of computer for part of their life knows that their own file system breaks down over time. You start off with the best of intent, and within a couple of months it's completely broken down. You've forgotten where you've stored everything. So you can see it on a very personal level, the way that things break down. So if you can transpose that into a large organisation, you can see that with the best will and intent, that these things are still going to become a problem as well, and actually maintaining and knowledge and oversight of your data system can just become inherently difficult.
It's essentially a visibility problem. And I mean, going back to the military days, we spent ages on visualization of data. It's great having loads of data, but how do you visualize it? How do you make it accessible to human beings, make sure it's up to date, etc., etc.? So there's that visualization problem. And we talk about industry, you've got to remember this is critical national infrastructure in many cases, and the clue's in the name. A, it's critical for the functioning of the country, and B, it's national in nature. So this is serious, and critical national infrastructure, in my view, is essentially a partnership between government and industry. So in assessing data integrity, one of the things to look at the high level is how well is that partnership working.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, when I'm thinking about data integrity, I'm thinking just generally about it and the importance of being able to run businesses and to run industrial processes. It doesn't have to be industrial; it could be any business. Really, the ability to make decisions is based on the information that you have. The more accurate that is, the more precise you are, the better the decisions that you make. But that aspect about bringing government into it as well, and actually, thinking about it in terms of national importance, both for businesses and critical infrastructure, but the ability for government to influence how businesses control their data or how well they manage their data. Are you seeing government intervening more?
We've got a new act coming through, isn't it? So the Cybersecurity and Resilience Act. We'll see what that produces, and some of us are involved in providing advice on that. But yeah, and you make a very important point, because you and I will talk from an industrial network point of view. But this is way broader than that. So perhaps one of the best examples of a data integrity problem is fake news, and the way that elections can be subject to various forms of fraud, increasingly nowadays. So I think that people would approach a company like us and say, essentially, stop me being attacked. In the future, they may be approaching us and saying, stop me being manipulated, which might be just as dangerous as being attacked.
For me, that's really interesting as well. I think that people, when they look at it from a security perspective, now that people have got examples of being manipulated as well, you can see that actually that they will see the similarities between that and being attacked. I suppose a lot of the attacks, as you were saying, actually are about being manipulated earlier. It's just people view it in a different way. If you've got, if your data is being poisoned, if the wrong information is being given to you about your plant, you are effectively being manipulated into making the wrong decisions in the way that you operate. I suppose when you think about it in the fake news terms, you're being manipulated to maybe think differently about your strategy or the way that you act as a company, rather than the way you respond to the kind of information that you was manipulated with in the Stuxnet attack on the Iranian centrifuges. And I can see that that when people think about it in these terms, they will come to a cybersecurity company, but and they will think about it in terms of attack, and they will be thinking about it in terms of being manipulated. Probably less so about just thinking about the overall quality of the data that they gather and the unintentional breakdown in the quality of their data. And that's an area that I'm really interested in, because I think that people find that dealing with that almost insurmountable. That how do you deal with generally poor quality data or doubt in your data? But I see it as very much the same thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting area. So one of the things we see in cybersecurity, where it specifically relates to operational technology, industrial control systems, is that there's rarely one person that can solve that issue. And that's a microcosm of what you just talked about. So, who are we dealing with? Is it the head of IT that's been given the OT security problem? The good news there is that they'll have a pretty good view of cybersecurity from their IT background, but they won't know anything about the process and control systems that they're dealing with. So, okay, do you give it to engineering or operations? Well, that's sort of the opposite. They'll know the control systems really well, but they won't have a very good grip, in all likelihood, on cybersecurity. Or is it someone else that's driving this? Very often in the industries we'll deal with, it'll be the head of health and safety, because it's a safety issue. And so who actually is responsible for this? And the real answer is, it takes a team. And that's one of the truisms, I suppose, about OT securities, it takes a team. Now if you expand that to not just what people are deliberately doing to you, but the inherent flaws in your data, so then you get to a situation where the solution will almost certainly have to be provided by a team as well.
Yeah.
So there may be no such thing as a data integrity company that you can go to for a solution. It may be, I mean, if you look at our two companies, put them together and you can cover probably most of the controls that you need in order to improve data integrity. But when the solution's a team, as well as the people procuring that solution within the client company, there's a complexity there, and that may be why this is proved so difficult to deal with.
Yeah. I wonder whether actually just people actually trying to encourage people to think of data integrity as being the broader issue, and that there are elements to deal with when we're thinking about data integrity, and that could be from cybersecurity, it could be from data management, it could be data gathering, it could be data cleansing. There's so many aspects of it. But if we're actually to try and push the notion of data integrity a little bit further within companies, that it might help in being able to form those teams around that. And actually, when we think about just how important it is to organisations to deal with this.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the sort of range of solutions we'd have to introduce, human factors may almost be where you start. So how is that data being handled by humans? How does change management work, etc., on the operator side? And then you've got other humans that are more in decision maker roles. So what's their threat perception? Is the intelligence they're receiving on threats accurate? What's their risk assessment like? What's the risk appetite like? And how does that relate to company strategy? So you've sort of got to deal with that human element first before you sort of delve down into the actual data integrity, the technical aspect of the data integrity issues.
Absolutely, I would agree. We need to really think. I think first off, you've got to kind of, there's got to be a raising of an awareness that actually the company should be taking action, and that you can take action. That you can. This isn't an insurmountable problem. It's not an easy problem, but it's not insurmountable, and that you can get after this. But it takes that cohesion within an organisation. But it's that belief that it is something that can be addressed and that it is important to address it. I think when you're talking about risk perception, I think that's we've generally accept a lack of knowledge. We are ignorant of more things than we are knowledgeable of, and within any organisation that would be true. That would be true as well. And so there is we've learned to live with that risk in a lot of ways. As we said, we have hedging strategies. We have conservatism introduced in the decisions. We make decisions with the best possible decisions with the data that we feel that we have available. But there is more data available than ever before, and we use data systems more than ever before. And so the threat, I believe, becomes bigger, but the opportunity also becomes bigger with that as well. So actually, I think how we perceive the risk and opportunity from data needs to change slightly. Then, as the world changes, that we need to have a reappraisal of the risk of how we use data and manage data within organisations.
Yeah, and the world sort of has changed, and even in the cybersecurity domain, and there have been a number of key changes where you've seen sort of weapon systems that now self-replicate and are designed to hunt down networks that they can get into, export credentials from, and then do something bad to. Stuxnet was at the forefront of that. And the result of that is that malware like Stuxnet is in networks all over the world now.
Yeah.
We may have it in our networks. Now, it's not doing anything bad because it's not carrying a payload that would allow it to do that, but it's got this inherent ability to seek out networks and get into them. So then you've got these unintended consequences, and people are obsessed by whether or not they're going to get attacked, but actually it's probably more likely you'll be collateral damage in someone else's attack. So you look at Maersk 2017, NotPetya, it was never aimed at Maersk. And actually, it wasn't just Maersk it affected, Merck, for instance, and other large companies as well. But the target was a small Ukrainian accountancy firm, and it's almost certain that someone was just testing out a weapon system on them. But it got out. So it's that collateral damage aspect that you need to be very aware of.
Yes. But I suppose there is a heightened awareness that people need to take action to protect their cyber security. But as we were saying, that is very much about a big part. Effectively, that is a part of ensuring your data integrity and managing your systems. And I think companies would be seen as being incredibly lax if they didn't do so. If you were a company who was fell foul of one of these cyber attacks, and you lost significant shareholder value, or there was a safety incident because of it, or there was significant impact to the company. If your shareholders were to look at your operations and find that you had no cybersecurity policy in place, you hadn't engaged with anyone, to look at how you protected your systems, they would be absolutely appalled. But similarly, though, you're losing a huge amount of value from your company if you simply hadn't looked at how well you manage your data. It may not be under attack, but it could be gradually deteriorating, and your inability to make decisions and to make the best decisions could be completely compromised. Then actually, you could be shedding a huge amount of value from the company. But it's not necessarily thought of in the same way. But it's not that it's a malicious attack, but it's still a leaching of value. I'm just wondering whether or not over time the government and industry approach to how well data is managed will follow the same route as how cybersecurity is managed, where there is this huge expectation that a company will put significant effort into managing data quality and data integrity as they're expected to do for cybersecurity.
Yeah, you're seeing ways of this starting to appear. So, virtualizing industrial control networks to give you sort of better control, and that would give you better control of the data, or secondary sensors, virtual sensors, and all that sort of stuff. But what I suspect we're not seeing is a holistic approach to the data chain end to end to really make an attempt to assure it to the extent that you can make very fine-tuned judgments based upon it.
Yeah. The ways in which we can use the data are improving all the time. The visualizations are become a big part of how we do things. I think simply that when you're looking at huge volumes of data, visualization is the only way that we can interpret it. There's simply so few ways that as a human you can take that information on. But it still has to be based on correct data. Your visualizations could help you interpret something that is still fundamentally wrong if that data has been interpreted. I suppose the question then becomes, what do we do about it? As organisations, we've talked a lot about the threat from it or the opportunities from improvement. But I suppose the question is what can we do to ensure the integrity of data within an organisation?
Yeah, so I think that the response is going to be quite holistic. There'll be a number of elements to it. I'd certainly like to engage with industry to take a closer look at this and really work out what an end-to-end data chain assurance system would look like. But the interesting thing is, I still believe that the solution would involve a team rather than the single entity. So it's putting the team together that's going to be fascinating.
Absolutely. I've heard it mooted recently in conversation about standards for data assurance. In the way that we've recently seen standards for cybersecurity, being brought in, and the potential for that. Do you think there's space for a data assurance standard, or do you think that would be very difficult to implement?
So, as a company, we all say compliance is not security in the security area. So, viscerally, I don't like the idea of relying on standards and compliance, but everything I see in industry tells me that in the end that's what drives success, if you see what I mean, and resilience. So resilience should be something that we seek just for its own sake, but actually I think standards, compliance, even regulation, if it's a direct threat to CNI, are going to be necessary.
Yeah, I agree. I could see it coming, that actually they will start to see standards imposed or suggested. That's the thing with standards, you don't have to adopt them, but it can become the expectation that you do. I suppose the problem as well is that that becomes a base minimal. that's all people try to do. You say, well, that's what the standard says, that's what we're compliant to, when actually there should be something where you're striving for to be the best you possibly can. The more accurate the information, the more precise your outcomes.
Yeah. And I think that's probably going to be to do with competitive advantage. And I think competitive advantage becomes more important as margins reduce. You only have to look at British industry across the world to see that there's a trend towards reducing margins, which makes efficiency and effectiveness not just a good thing, but absolutely essential. I think, and maybe the other thing is that we keep talking about rising threat levels, and so someone like me would go, yeah, well, look at what's happening in Ukraine, look at what's happening around the world. But of course, there's almost a rising threat level that is inherent in our own technology. So apparently you can't have a podcast without mentioning AI, so let me do that now. But it is that rubbish in, rubbish out. So what we're talking about would have been important 10 years ago, really important. But it's now vital because AI will take that data integrity problem and supersize it for you.
Yes. It is absolutely your competitive edge, I would say. That actually, if you want to make use of AI, if you want to make stay competitive, and protect yourself from threats, not just from malicious actors, but from your competition. This focus on data integrity and making sure that you have the right information, whether that's to feed your AI or simply to base your everyday decisions on. I think it still becomes absolutely fundamental.
Innes, I couldn't agree more.
It was great. Really enjoyed the conversation as usual. I'm sure we'll carry it on again.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
No, thanks for coming. This has been really enjoyable. Thanks.